Hi everyone, it's Lindsay from High Altitude Astrology. And today with the moon in Aries forming a sextile to the sun in Aquarius, the first sextile after our new moon in Aquarius that occurred, I wanted to talk about the chart of Kobe Bryant. And I first want to explain my experience when I heard the devastating news. It was, as some people have described it, a feeling of disbelief, a feeling of just complete sadness. I actually cried at different times throughout the processing of hearing of the experience and integrating the experience, even though I'm not really a basketball follower. Of course, I knew who he was and have heard about different things throughout his life, but it affected me deeply on some level, and I wanted to address that in his chart today. One of the first things I thought about as well was just how his wife was feeling, obviously that may seem like a normal reaction, but definitely there's a pattern in the chart, or in his chart, and in the current transits of the sky that connect his passing with a larger karmic energy that's occurring right now that is affecting all of us collectively. So here is his chart on the screen, and it is a synastry chart with his birth chart as well as the time of the accident. And I wanted to point out that I have a 5 o'clock birth time that is from Astrology, although they do say that the source is unknown. And then this is as close to the time of the accident that I had heard, 9:45 a.m. in Calabasas, California. So to talk a little bit about Kobe's natal chart, you can really see that he had intensity and drive. I mean, obviously, look at what he created in his life. So if we look at the sun in his chart, he had a 0 degrees Virgo sun, and it was right next to Saturn at 3 degrees of Virgo. So when we think of the sun in Virgo, that's the energy of, in one respect, like the apprentice. It's somebody who can repeatedly do things, do tasks in order to get really good at it. In astrology, Virgo energy is the apprentice. It's somebody who apprentices with somebody else and can repeatedly do whatever it is they're trying to learn in order to ground and grow that skill. Now, it's also next to Saturn, and Saturn is the energy of work, and Saturn is the energy of effort, and it's about concentration, and it's really able to kind of hang in there for the long haul. So those two energies combined show us that he really was able to really dedicate himself to the practice of, learning how to play basketball and becoming really good over time at what he was learning. Now, he also has an interesting stellium up here in his 9th house, and that is with Mars at 12 degrees of Libra, Pluto at 14 degrees of Libra, and Venus at 16 degrees of Libra. And when you've got Mars and Pluto next to each other in the chart, that is an additional source of energy and power and strength, because Mars is that male principle of drive and of action and of effort. And then Pluto there can offer very focused attention and very powerful energy to enhance that drive. Both Mars and Pluto are co-rulers of Scorpio. And so he's essentially got this kind of scorpionic power there sitting in Libra in that ninth house. And that ninth house, of course, is the Sagittarian house of consciousness expansion and of sort of like moving towards our dreams, moving towards bigger ideas, bigger goals. So he had a very concentrated energy pack there that helped him continue to kind of go after the things that he decided, he wanted to do in his life. And of course, Venus is right there too, which is the principle, the feminine principle of love and creativity. And this is all in the sign of Libra, which Venus rules. And Libra is about creating harmony and balance and relationship. So I'll get to this a little bit later again, but this could also be some of the issues that he had with infidelity, and he was ultimately accused of rape by somebody in his life. So this could also speak to that energy within him, because you've got the two sexual principles, Venus and Mars, with Pluto in between them. And Pluto is all about the energy of, at its sort of highest level of expression, it's about the ability to go through the process of death and transformation, the metaphorical process, or on a psychological level, or to really transform, basically. And it's bringing in the sexual elements in his life. So Pluto also is about power and control. So there's a suggestion here that this stellium perhaps was part of that energy that sort of he had to ultimately go through a transformative process around in his life in order to basically kind of gain more control and to transform through those processes. So that's a little bit about his natal chart. You can see here he has a Taurus moon at 11 degrees. And he's got a Capricorn rising at 7 degrees. And that too, going back to the Sun Saturn in his chart, that too is going to give him a lot of drive and a lot of desire to really achieve and be able to focus and work at what it is he wanted to do in his life. Now, there were a few transits going on in his chart at the time of his passing, and I want to point out that Uranus, which has been in the sign of Taurus for about a year, was creating a trine to his Saturn. And this started back in August of 2018, and it was going to complete this March. And when you have Uranus, which is the planet of revolution and change and can be rebelliousness, Uranus is really about an awakening energy. It's called a transpersonal planet. And along with Neptune and Pluto, it's not so much a personal planet in the chart. It's more about bringing in higher states of awareness in order to progress us, to help us evolve. So with Uranus, because Uranus is connected to the energy of humanity, although it's about individualism, it is about recognizing that we are also all one in the midst of our individuality, and how do we want to create a world that encompasses everyone. And Uranus is a lot about like, it's about advancing our awareness, really. It's about advancing our consciousness and showing us that we can be an individual, but at the same time recognizing everyone else's individuality too. It's a very, in some ways, detached, aloof kind of, it's not very personal in a sense, because it is recognizing that everybody is a part of the whole. And so it's kind of the opposite of the sign that opposes it, which is Leo, which is ruled by the sun, and it's all about the self and the ego. Uranus is more like, okay, you know, yes, we do have an individuality, but it doesn't have to come at the expense of everybody else's. So that's Uranus. And let me get a few more keywords here for Uranus. Uniqueness, innovation, experimental, and including others. So that energy has been in Taurus, and Taurus is the sign of many things. It's about creativity. It's about what we value. It's about relating, our relationships. It's about what brings us security in life. And so Uranus and Taurus has been bringing this kind of awakening to those Taurian aspects of our lives and helping us, because Taurus is a fixed energy. So it really holds on. You know, that's one of the key words for Taurus is possessiveness. So Uranus is in Taurus's sign for the next 6 years, and it's asking us, and we're just beginning this, and you know, this new moon that we just had, which was on the 24th of January, was in the sign of Aquarius, and it was squaring the Uranus here in Taurus. And so there was something that was ignited at that new moon time that's going to be the theme of this next month, that is bringing into all of our awareness collectively the need to really, in some ways, evolve our relationship to those things that we value, our relationship to relationships. And it's asking us to really kind of accept what works and what doesn't, and to not force our personal, you know, needs onto things that just aren't ultimately a part of the big picture, you know, not to hold on so much in that Taurian way to the things that we think we value or think are supposed to, you know, bring us security in our lives. And of course, this is an energy, like I said, Uranus and Taurus, it's going to be around for the next 6 years. So we're going to be getting more and more of a integration of what this energy is all about. But I think this new moon set the stage, because the sun was in Aquarius, which again, Uranus rules. And so it's how we shine our light in this very individualistic way, keeping in mind the whole of humanity, with Uranus in Taurus squaring it, which was asking us to really kind of evolve our attachment to things, our attachment to what we think we value. You know, it's saying like, we really can't hold on, you know, we just can't hold on to what we might sort of really want to hold on to if it's just not in the flow, you know. And So that's Uranus and Taurus. What I see with this Uranus trining his Saturn in Virgo, that Saturn is how we create foundation, how we create structure in our life. In Virgo, it's in those doing things repetitively in order to get good at it. It's also the intellect and analyzing and really doing, in some ways, kind of the asserting ourselves in our work and in effort and creating foundation in our life. In some ways, it's about being humble, and it's about the just getting down to the tasks that need to be taken care of. So I'm thinking that part of what he was going through with this Uranus and Taurus trining his Saturn in Virgo is that somehow it was shaking up in a helpful way, because the Uranus is trining the Saturn, and bringing insight and innovation into the ways that he went about doing whatever he was doing in his life. And actually, now that I'm thinking about it, because I know he had retired and he was focusing some of his energy on really giving back to the community. I think he was involved with his daughter's basketball team, I believe it was, and teaching girls more about basketball. So this was really kind of like helping him to sort of innovate his work, and in a way that did give back to the community, to humanity, And I know that this was perhaps a way that, he was maybe making up for some of the other aspects of his life that he wasn't necessarily proud of. And I will move on to that at this time, because I think that's where some of this, the other transits that were occurring on that day of the crash really speak to. So that day, which was Sunday, January 26th, you can see the red on the outside of the chart. That's where all the planets were that day. Those were the transits of that day. And the moon was in late degrees of Aquarius at about 26. So we're still, feeling that new moon energy that day. And the other thing that had been occurring around that time, or on that day, I should say, is that Mars and Venus were squaring. So we had Venus at 15 Pisces, and we had Mars at 15 Sag. So you can see Venus right here at 15 Pisces, and Mars right here at 15 Sag. And you can also see that Venus is right here near Neptune. And actually the next day, which would be Monday the 27th, those two planets made an exact conjunction. So it was really Venus who was moving around the chart here, because she moves the fastest out of those three. So the day after the crash, she was squaring Mars. And then the day after that, she was conjuncting Neptune. And then actually the day after that, Mars was squaring Neptune. So Venus in Pisces is what's called exalted. And what that means is that Venus can express itself in a very high way. If Venus is about our social ability and our pleasures and our creative expression, a few more keywords, affection and artistry. Basically, Venus in Pisces. Pisces is the last sign of the zodiac before we move into Aries again. And it's a mutable water sign. And it's symbolic in the natural zodiac of the changing of the season. It's just right before springtime. And it's in some ways preparing for the next cardinal season of Aries, where we will go out and life will spring forth. So there's this interning energy about Pisces. It's a very sensitive energy because it's water, which relates to emotion and feeling. And Venus in Pisces is really about, like, I think of like Christ, or, you know, these type Buddha, these types of figures that in our religious history that have this compassionate love that transcends the ego, transcends the self. So this is the energy that Venus is in right now. And it's been moving around the chart, and it was squaring that Mars in Sag. And Mars is about, again, a self-assertion and it's about the male. So Venus is about the female sexual energy, the receptive energy, while Mars is about the male penetrating energy. And Mars in Sag, it's an intellectual energy. So it asserts itself, or it uses its courage and strength in this realm of philosophies and ethics and morality and philosophies. It's even in some ways it's like religion, because it relates to the moral principles that religions talk about living by. So it's these two energies, this transcendent loving energy and this Mars in Sagittarius, like knowing the right way of doing something, that we're challenging one another. And because Venus moves the fastest, this means that this was what's called an opening square. So opening squares kind of bring the crisis in consciousness, or brings the new awareness to our awareness. And I think what was happening with this energy is that we were being challenged to look at something between the two principles of the sexual energy in a way that required Venus in Pisces, which is like transcending these really strong moralistic, ethical principles that we might hold each other to, and saying, how can we still love, you know? And I believe that this comes back to this Venus, Mars, Pluto stellium in Kobe's chart in Libra in the 9th, where we are seeing how, you know, especially with some of the subsequent talk about his life, you know, because some people really want to just focus on what a amazing, almost, you know, superhuman person Venus in Pisces he was. But others are saying, hey, you know, he had this past, and he had this you know, this shadow around, you know, the rape accusation, and we should be focusing on his ethical and moral behavior. And how do we, you know, how do we integrate, or how do we rationalize Mars and Sagittarius, that with the real need to just accept and have compassion. Now, what makes this kind of a collective issue is because Neptune's right there, and the outer planets, Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto, all talk about collective energy, because they move so slowly that they affect all of us, you know, they affect the collective. Of course, they can stand out in our personal charts if they're in certain configurations with other planets or in certain houses, but really they are about generational energies that we are all experiencing together. And so that next day, like I said, Venus and Neptune on the 27th of January made a conjunction. And Neptune rules Pisces. And Neptune is all about transcendence, and it is all about having compassion and having an emotional relationship to the world and to one another that transcends our personal egos. And it's also about serving humanity. You know, that's one way the Neptunian energy can be expressed, is how do we serve humanity through that Neptunian compassionate energy, because that's a really good way to direct the energy. And it's interesting to note, well, let me just finish this thought. So that Venus-Neptune, that conjunction the next day, as Mars and Venus were finishing their square, and this is an opening conjunction, you know, this is the beginning of a cycle with Venus and Neptune, because Venus is going to move on and go all the way around the horoscope and come back to the closing conjunction. So as Venus is closing in Pisces, it's also beginning a new cycle with Venus, with Neptune here. This is really collectively about how do we love? How do we have compassion? How do we open our hearts while at the same time having some moral and ethical way of like self-asserting? You know, it is bringing up this issue of like, is it possible, you know, where has the male energy in Sag, which can be like boundaryless because it's ruled by Jupiter, and it's like, it can be so enthusiastic and just expand so much that it really, it doesn't contain its energy very well. So how do these, you know, it's bringing up this issue of where are the boundaries with that male assertive energy in relationship to compassion and love, but also like seeing the feminine energy in a very elevated, in a very sacred way. And I know that ironically, Kobe was at church before the accident that morning. Is what I heard in the news, which is just, to me, a perfect reflection, because you can see Mars was on his Neptune that day in Sagittarius. And so this is like activating his Neptune in Sag. And now he was born with Neptune in Sag, and so were a group of people that were born between 77 and 78, basically. A couple of months in 77, and then about 6 months in 78. And so you know, there's a lot of people that are going to have Neptune in Sag, but it just is interesting to me that that day he was having Mars activating that Neptune in his chart. And on a very mundane level, the accident they're saying was potentially due to fog. And Neptune can be that sort of clouded, foggy energy of not seeing things clearly. And so Mars there in Sag, which is like, well, let's go, let's just do it, you know, it's a lot of enthusiasm, was on that Neptune. Now, of course, not everybody that has Neptune and Sag at that degree had this kind of experience, but I do find it interesting that Mars was right on his Neptune that day, with Venus and Neptune squaring his Neptune at 16 degrees of Pisces. But going back to that Mars on his Neptune, I mean, this was really, and him being at church, this is really an energy, and probably with that Neptune square, because Neptune had been squaring his own Neptune for a period of time. It's possible he was sort of going through kind of a very a reorientation of his belief system and reconnecting perhaps with his beliefs in his life. And with Venus and Neptune there squaring that Neptune in his chart, it was also probably in some ways on a personal level asking him to look at his relationship to the feminine principle in this very spiritual way. With the Mars going over the Neptune, perhaps in a way that he's, you know, not necessarily reflected fully on before. You know, it was probably helping him in some ways to continue his understanding or relationship to a very transcendent way of connecting to the feminine principle. So I think that's everything I want to say about Kobe Bryant's chart at this time. And I do want to end with just saying, I think I want to end by just saying I really, again, had an emotional reaction to this experience. And I really thought of his wife and how, you know, she in some ways is embodying this Venus-Neptune connection with the Mars and Sag square, because it's like there's no way of rationalizing this kind of experience in one's life. There's no way of even, you know, comprehending it. And in some ways, it's like she's embodying this Venus, Neptune, and Pisces energy that began around that time, where it's like sometimes we have to just bear the experiences of our lives and are unable to put it into some kind of mental context. You know, it just is something that we have to ultimately experience and go through and suffer through until we can, you know, find some peace with it. And I am just talking, I mean, I can't say that I know anything about what she's experiencing, but all I can speak to is the symbolism here. And it's really contrasting this sort of Mars and Sag, like upbeat, ethical, moral, integrity, conceptual level of self-assertion, with just complete like acceptance and transcendence and compassion. And how do we collectively integrate those two concepts into all of our lives? Thank you so much for watching this video. If you'd like to reach me, you can send me an email at info@highaltitudeastrology.com. I also have a website online, High Altitude Astrology, and please subscribe if you like my videos. Thank you so much.